My name is Clara, and in all my 25 years, I had never truly belonged. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who worked 3 part-time jobs while juggling a full medical school schedule. My sister, Genevieve, was the queen of our family, the golden child whose every whim was a command. My grandmother, bless her soul, had seen through the charade. In her will, she had established a trust fund, a substantial sum of money meant for my medical education. The only catch? It couldn't be touched until I was ready to graduate. It was a lifeline she had given me, a quiet defiance of my family's habit of taking everything and giving nothing. I thought it was safe. I was wrong. The day I came home to find my parents' smiles a little too wide, and my sister's hand holding a new car key, my stomach dropped. They had gotten to it. As I listened to my mother's casual announcement, my mind raced. The trust fund was gone. The money I had worked for, the money my grandmother had set aside, was now a down payment on my sister's car and a deposit for her extravagant wedding. This was a betrayal on a level I hadn't thought possible, a theft not of money, but of my future. I decided right then and there I would not be a victim. I would not simply stand by and watch them use me one last time. I started with a quiet investigation, a deep dive into my grandmother's last wishes, a search for the trust fund's executor. I wasn't surprised to find the man who held the key to my future was the one person my family had successfully alienated from their lives. My estranged uncle, Richard. I knew what I had to do. This was my moment to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, and to finally get justice. If you've ever felt like your family sees you as a resource rather than a person, you're not alone. I'm just starting to realize that myself. Before we get into what happened next, please subscribe and like this video to join me on this journey as I get back what's mine. The air was thick with a manufactured excitement, the kind of buzz that always accompanied Genevieve's grand pronouncements. It was a Saturday morning, a time I usually spent buried in medical textbooks, but a text from my mother, urgent family meeting, had pulled me away. As I stepped inside, the scent of lavender and the sound of my mother's nervous humming filled the air. My father was on the phone, his voice a low, placating rumble, while Genevieve, draped in a silk robe, was scrolling through a wedding planner's Instagram, a smug smile plastered on her face. I had a bad feeling, a very bad feeling. My mother, Beatrice, bustled over, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She hugged me a little too tightly, the way she always did when she was about to ask for a small family favor. She led me into the living room, where my father, Robert, had just hung up the phone. He gave me a weary smile, a silent apology for the chaos that was about to unfold. I sat on the edge of the couch, my spine straight, my mind already preparing for the inevitable. My sister, Genevieve, finally looked up from her phone, her eyes glinting with a self-satisfaction that sent a shiver down my spine. "So, Clara," she began, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, "we have some wonderful news." She held out her hand, a new, massive diamond ring sparkling on her finger. "Daniel and I are getting married, and we've found the perfect venue. It's an old castle in Italy. Isn't it just divine?" She waited for my reaction, her smile a challenge. My parents beamed in the background, a perfectly curated portrait of parental pride. "That's wonderful," I said, my voice as flat as I could make it. I looked at the ring, the car keys on the coffee table, and the expensive brochures scattered around the room. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. My mother finally broke the news. "Honey, we have a small issue with the finances." She spoke as if it were an inconvenience, not a betrayal. "The down payment for the venue, Daniel's parents are helping with a part of it, but we were a little short. And you know, your father and I had some unexpected debt from his business, so we had to use the money from your grandmother's trust fund." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The trust fund, the one thing that was supposed to be mine, was gone. My grandmother had established it with a lawyer she knew from her college days, and the trust was supposed to be ironclad. They were supposed to use the money only for my education, only after I finished my bachelor's degree. It's not like you needed it right now anyway, my father interjected, his eyes avoiding mine. You're only in medical school. You'll get more money for your education. I looked at him, at the man who had always been a quiet accomplice to my mother and sister's schemes, and felt a bitter resentment rise in my throat. It's my money, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the celebratory air like a knife. Grandma left it to me, not to you, not to pay off your debts, and not for Genevieve's wedding. Genevieve's face twisted into a scowl. Don't be selfish, Clara, it's family. You're going to be a doctor, you'll be rich someday. We need this now. The entitlement in her voice was staggering. It was the same old song and dance, the same old excuse. My mother tried to smooth things over. It's just a small loan, honey. Genevieve will get a big settlement from Daniel's family and will pay you back with interest. I laughed, a harsh, dry sound, a loan. From a family who had never repaid me for anything. A family who had seen me as a convenient bank account since I was a child. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. I am not a bank. And I am not a fool. I looked from my mother's pleading face to my father's stoic one, and finally to my sister's angry one. The years of quiet resentment, of being the family's emotional and financial doormat, welled up inside me. I thought of the countless times I had covered for Genevieve, the times I had sacrificed my own happiness for her. I thought of my grandmother, a woman who had seen my potential and my pain, and who had tried to give me a chance at a real future. They had taken that from me. They had stolen not just my money, but my grandmother's last act of love. I walked out of the living room, a quiet fury burning in my heart. As I reached for the front door, my mother called out, "Clara, where are you going?" I turned and looked at her, my eyes cold and unwavering. "I'm going to get back what's mine." I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the silent house, leaving a family who had just declared war without even knowing it. I drove through the city streets, a blur of traffic and neon lights, my mind a whirlwind of anger and determination. I had a single goal, to get my inheritance back. My first stop was my small, one-bedroom apartment, where I spent the rest of the day meticulously going through my grandmother's old papers. She had left me a box of her journals and documents, a treasure trove of memories and secrets. I found a worn business card tucked between the pages of her favorite book. Richard Hayes, Hayes and Associates, Estate Law. He was the one, my estranged uncle, my grandmother's only brother, the man my parents had vilified for years, claiming he was a troublemaker who had abandoned the family. I now understood why. He was the only one who had ever stood up to them. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, calm voice answered. "Richard Hayes." My heart was pounding in my chest. "Hello, Uncle Richard. It's Clara." There was a long pause on the other end, a moment of silence that stretched into an eternity. "Clara, is that really you? I haven't heard from you in years." His voice was warm and familiar, a relic from a time before the family had exiled him. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about the trust fund, about my sister's extravagant wedding plans, and about my parents' casual betrayal. I told him how they had used my inheritance to fund their own lifestyle, and how they had treated it as if it were their own money. He listened quietly, and when I was finished, he let out a low whistle. I knew they would do something like this. Your grandmother and I, we had a feeling. That's why we made sure the trust fund was legally ironclad. They shouldn't have been able to touch it without your signature. My heart sank. My signature? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But I never signed anything. He was silent for a moment, and then his voice hardened. They forged your signature, Clara. They forged the legal documents to gain access to the trust fund. That's a federal crime. The words federal crime hit me with the force of a tidal wave. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had committed a felony. My uncle, the man they had cast out, was my only hope. He told me to come to his office the next morning and to bring every document I had. He said he had a feeling that this was only the tip of the iceberg, that my parents and sister had been getting away with this kind of behavior for a long time. The next morning, I walked into Richard's office, a sleek, modern building with a view of the city skyline. He looked exactly as I remembered him, tall, with a kind face and a sharp, discerning gaze. He greeted me with a genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the performative affection of my family. I handed him the box of my grandmother's documents, and he began to sift through them. He found the original trust fund documents, the ones with my grandmother's signature and mine. He held up a second, falsified document, the one my parents had forged to get access to the money. The signature was a crude imitation of my own. My stomach twisted with disgust. Richard began to explain the legal process to me. "We can't just call the police, Clara. Your parents will deny everything, and your sister will cry and play the victim. We need a plan. We need to gather more evidence to prove a pattern of behavior." He pulled out a ledger, a simple notebook with a faded cover. It was my grandmother's. "Your grandmother wrote everything down," he said, a note of reverence in his voice. "Every cent she gave to your parents, every loan to Genevieve, it's all in here." I looked at the pages, filled with my grandmother's elegant handwriting. It was a silent testament to a lifetime of financial manipulation. My grandmother had kept a meticulous record of every family favor she had extended and every cent she had never been repaid. She had known. She had known all along what they were capable of, and she had left me the tools to fight back. My Uncle Richard's office felt like a sanctuary, a quiet space of rationality and purpose, far removed from the emotional whirlwind of my family. The ledger, my grandmother's final gift to me, was a gold mine. It was filled with meticulous details, a silent indictment of my family's deceit. My grandmother had a systematic way of documenting everything, from small loans to my father for his failed business ventures to large sums given to my mother to bail out Genevieve from credit card debt. I saw a note from 2 years ago, $25,000 for Genevieve's car loan. The word loan was in quotation marks, my grandmother's quiet sarcasm. The ledger contained a detailed account of all the family favors my parents and sister had received, and not a single one had been repaid. Richard pointed to a specific entry. September 15, 2019. $10,000 to Beatrice for emergency home repairs. Genevieve's new car, new credit card debt, and a trip to Cancun. My grandmother had known. She had known that my mother was lying, and she had documented it all. The more I read, the more I understood the depth of my family's manipulation. They had been using me, my grandmother, and anyone else who would give them money for years. My sister's life of luxury wasn't earned. It was paid for with other people's money. The trust fund was just the final, grand theft. My uncle outlined our plan. We couldn't go to the police yet. My family would deny everything, and it would turn into a he said, she said legal battle that would cost me more time and money than it was worth. The goal was to expose their lies to the one person who could truly hurt them, Daniel's family. Daniel was the heir to a massive real estate fortune, a family that prided itself on its integrity and business ethics. They would never allow their son to marry into a family of liars and thieves. The plan was simple. Gather an irrefutable case, present it to Daniel's parents, and let them be the ones to put a stop to the wedding. This would not only stop the wedding, but it would also force my family to pay for their crimes. My first task was to get close to Daniel's family. My second was to find more evidence. I started by using my parents' social media. My mother had a habit of posting pictures of Genevieve's lavish lifestyle, not realizing she was leaving a digital trail of receipts. I found photos of Genevieve on a private jet, at a 5-star hotel, and in a designer wedding dress. I cross-referenced the dates with the bank records my grandmother had kept in her ledger, and the dates matched. Every lavish purchase was followed by a large withdrawal from my grandmother's account. My mother's posts, meant to show off her daughter's success, were now proof of her family's fraud. My mother called me that afternoon, her voice a mixture of anger and panic. "Clara, "What did you do? The caterer just called. They said they've been contacted by a private investigator." My heart pounded in my chest. The private investigator was a man my uncle had hired to secretly dig for more dirt. "I didn't do anything, Mom," I said, a faint smile on my face. "I'm sure they just want to make sure Genevieve is really who she says she is." My mother scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. This is all your fault. You're trying to sabotage her wedding, aren't you?" The accusation was so familiar, so expected, that I felt a strange sense of calm. Am I, Mom? Or did I just finally stop being a fool? I hung up, leaving her to stew in her own paranoia. The game had begun. My Uncle Richard and I spent the next week meticulously organizing all the evidence we had gathered. The old ledger, my grandmother's silent witness, was our foundation. We cross-referenced its entries with my parents' public social media posts, Genevieve's lavish Instagram feed, and the financial records Richard's private investigator had managed to dig up. We had a comprehensive case file, a damning account of a family who had been living a lie for years. We had bank statements showing large sums of money transferred from my grandmother's accounts to my parents' accounts, receipts for luxury goods and vacations, and even a forged legal document with my signature on it. Richard then set up a meeting with Daniel's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. The meeting was at a discreet downtown coffee shop, a neutral location where we could speak freely. Mr. Thompson was a stoic man with a no-nonsense demeanor, a man who had built his empire on integrity and hard work. Mrs. Thompson was a kind woman, but I could see a steely resolve in her eyes. Richard and I sat across from them, our case file on the table between us. I was nervous, but I knew this was the only way to get justice. I looked at the file, a thick stack of papers and digital evidence. It was a silent testament to a family's betrayal. Richard began to speak, his voice calm and professional. He laid out the case, starting with the forgery of my signature on the trust fund documents and ending with the years of financial manipulation and fraud. He showed them the bank statements, the receipts for the extravagant purchases, and the forged documents. The Thompsons' faces grew paler with each page they turned. They saw the truth of my family's deceit, and their faces hardened with a mixture of shock and anger. They had been lied to. They had been told my family was old money, a respectable family with a long-standing history of wealth and integrity. They had been told that Genevieve was a trust fund baby who had her own money for her lifestyle. The truth was that my family was a fraud. Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Clara, I am so sorry," she said, her voice filled with a genuine sorrow. "We had no idea." Mr. Thompson, a man of few words, simply nodded. He stood up, his face a mask of disappointment. "We have a family to talk to," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This wedding is off. We will not allow our son to marry into a family of thieves and liars." He walked out, his wife right behind him, leaving a profound silence in their wake. I felt a sense of relief mixed with a strange kind of sadness. I had just destroyed my family, but I had also freed myself. That evening, my phone began to buzz with calls and texts from my mother, father, and sister. I ignored them all. I watched from the safety of my apartment as the first news story broke online, a local gossip blog with the headline, "Prominent business family calls off son's wedding to socialite after shocking discovery." The story was vague, but it was enough. The rumors began to swirl, and my family, who had always been so concerned with appearances, was now a public spectacle. The comments section of the blog was a wildfire, with people speculating about what could have happened. I smiled to myself, knowing that the truth would come out soon enough. The news of the wedding's cancellation spread like wildfire, a juicy piece of gossip that quickly consumed the local social circles. The online news outlets had a field day with it, and soon the story was everywhere. My family's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. My mother, who had always been so proud of her daughter's perfect life, was now a public figure of shame. My sister, Genevieve, a social media influencer, was now a pariah, with her followers turning on her in the comments section of her latest post. I watched it all from a safe distance, a silent spectator in a drama I had started. I had a meeting with Uncle Richard the next morning, and he told me what happened after the Thompsons left. They had gone straight to my family's house and confronted them with the evidence. My mother had denied everything, my father had tried to feign ignorance, and Genevieve had thrown a temper tantrum, accusing the Thompsons of being classless. Daniel, her fiancé, had been horrified. He had trusted her, and she had lied to him. The engagement was over, and the wedding was officially off. The Thompsons had not only called off the wedding, but they had also hired their own lawyers and were considering legal action for fraud. The Thompsons' actions were the final nail in the coffin. My family's lies were now public knowledge, and they couldn't deny it anymore. My mother's friends began to distance themselves, and my father's business associates began to question his ethics. The bank where my father worked was now under scrutiny for its lending practices, and he was being investigated for embezzlement. My sister's social media career was in ruins, with brands dropping her faster than she could delete the comments. Her life of luxury, which had been built on a foundation of lies, was now crumbling. My mother called me again, her voice a desperate, pleading sob. "Clara, please, you have to tell them you made a mistake. You have to tell them this isn't true." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "It is true, Mom, it's all true, and you did this to yourself." She began to cry, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. She had made her choices. She had chosen to steal from me, to lie to everyone, and to enable my sister's deceitful behavior. She had chosen a life of lies, and now she had to live with the consequences. "You're a monster," she hissed, her voice filled with a venomous rage. "You're a cold, unfeeling monster." I just stood there and listened, and for the first time in my life I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't a monster, I was a survivor. I hung up the phone and looked out my window, a sense of relief washing over me. I had done it. I had exposed their lies and I had gotten my revenge. But as I stood there, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about standing up for myself and for my grandmother. It was about reclaiming my future. I had been a victim for so long, and now I was in control. I had a new sense of purpose, a new sense of power. I was no longer Clara, the quiet girl who always gave in. I was Clara, the one who had finally said, "Enough is enough." The days that followed the wedding cancellation were filled with a tense, oppressive silence. My phone was quiet, and my parents had stopped trying to reach me. They were too busy dealing with the fallout of their public shaming. The Thompsons, true to their word, had hired their own legal team, and they had not only stopped the wedding, but they had also filed a lawsuit against my parents for fraud. The lawsuit, based on the evidence my uncle and I had gathered, was an open and shut case. My parents, who had always been so proud of their social standing, were now facing a financial and legal crisis that would destroy them. My sister Genevieve was a wreck. Her social media was in shambles, her friends had abandoned her, and her entire life of manufactured luxury was now a public joke. She had no job, no skills, and no one to turn to. The lavish wedding she had been planning, the one she had stolen my inheritance for, was now a painful reminder of her deceit. She called me, her voice filled with a desperate, pleading desperation. "Clara, please, we can fix this. Just tell them you made a mistake." I just listened to her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no sadness. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. "You're not my sister anymore," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "You were never my sister." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. My Uncle Richard called me that afternoon, his voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. He told me that my parents had been forced to file for bankruptcy and that my father had been fired from his job. The Thompsons had not only won their lawsuit, but they had also publicly shamed my parents in the media. The family, who had always been so proud of their reputation, was now a cautionary tale. "Clara, you have no idea what you've done," Richard said, a sense of awe in his voice. "You didn't just expose their lies, you destroyed their entire world." I knew that, and I didn't regret it. They had stolen my future, and I had taken theirs. I knew that this was the end of the line for my family. The life they had built on a foundation of lies and deceit had finally crumbled, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I had been a silent accomplice for so long, a quiet bystander in my own life, and now I was the one who had finally taken control. I had found my voice, and I had used it to speak the truth. I had done what my grandmother had wanted me to do. I had stood up for myself. I had not only gotten my inheritance back, but I had also freed myself from the emotional and financial prison my family had put me in. I was finally free. That night, I celebrated with Richard. He was the only family I had left, and I knew that he would always be there for me. We talked for hours, sharing stories about my grandmother and the family we had both been cast out of. He told me about how my grandmother had always worried about me, about my quiet nature and my willingness to sacrifice for others. "She knew they would take everything from you if you let them," he said. "She told me, 'Richard, you have to look out for my Clara. She's too good for them.'" I felt a pang of sadness mixed with a sense of immense gratitude. My grandmother had known all along, and she had given me the tools to fight back. She had given me a final gift, a gift of freedom. The phone call came 2 weeks later. It was my mother. Her voice, once filled with a proud confidence, was now small and defeated. She was calling from a small apartment in a part of town I didn't recognize. The bank had foreclosed on their house, and they were living in a small, one-bedroom apartment. My father had a new job, a part-time position at a local hardware store. My sister, Genevieve, was still living with them, unemployed and angry. "Clara, we need to talk," my mother said, her voice filled with a desperate pleading. "Please, just for a few minutes." I knew this was my final confrontation. This was my chance to say what I had always wanted to say. I agreed to meet her at a public park, a neutral ground where I could feel safe. I saw her sitting on a bench, a small, hunched figure in a cheap jacket. She looked so different from the woman who had sat at my kitchen table, confident and composed in her cream blazer. She looked old, defeated, and broken. I sat down beside her, and the silence stretched between us. She began to cry, a quiet, mournful sound. "I'm so sorry, Clara," she said, her voice filled with a genuine sorrow. "I'm so sorry for everything." I just looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no sadness, just a quiet, peaceful emptiness. "Why did you do it, Mom?" I asked, my voice calm and unwavering. "Why did you steal from me? Why did you lie to me for my entire life?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate pain. "We thought we were helping Genevieve," she said. "She was so fragile. She needed us." The same old excuse, the same old song and dance. "And what about me, Mom?" I asked, my voice filled with a quiet intensity. "What about my dreams? What about my future?" She looked at me, and I saw a moment of clarity in her eyes. "You were always the strong one, Clara," she said, her voice a whisper. "You didn't need us as much as she did." The words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I had always been the one who was overlooked, the one who was sacrificed for my sister's happiness. I had always been the strong one, the one who was expected to give everything and ask for nothing in return. I had been a resource, not a person. "I was a human being, Mom," I said, my voice filled with a quiet power. "And I deserved to be treated like one." She began to cry again, her tears now a sign of genuine remorse. She had finally seen the truth. She had finally understood the depth of her betrayal. "I lost both my daughters," she said, her voice filled with a profound sadness. "I lost you the moment I stole from you." I just stood up, and I looked at her, a strange sense of peace in my heart. "You lost me a long time ago, Mom," I said. "You just never noticed." I walked away from her, and I didn't look back. I had said everything I needed to say, and I had gotten my closure. My family was a closed chapter in my life, and I was ready to start a new one. As I walked, I felt a sense of freedom, a feeling of liberation that I had never experienced before. I had spent my entire life trying to be the person my family wanted me to be, and now I was finally free to be myself. I was free to live my life, to follow my own dreams, and to find my own happiness. I had lost my family, but I had gained something more valuable: my own life. 2 months after my final confrontation with my mother, my life was unrecognizable. My inheritance was back in my trust fund, a result of the Thompsons' lawsuit, and my father had been forced to sell off most of his assets to pay off his debts. My sister, Genevieve, was now working as a waitress in a small diner, a far cry from her life as a socialite. My family's shame was a constant source of gossip in the local community, and their reputation was in tatters. I, on the other hand, was thriving. I was back in medical school, my grades were better than ever, and I had a newfound sense of purpose. I was also spending more time with my Uncle Richard. He had become my confidant, my mentor, and my only true family. Richard and I had a standing date for coffee every Sunday morning, and we talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about my grandmother, about her resilience and her quiet strength. He told me that she had always seen me as her true heir, the one who would carry on her legacy of integrity and hard work. He had always been the black sheep of the family, and now I was too. I didn't mind. I had a new, chosen family, and they were the only ones who mattered. My social life had also improved. I had made new friends in medical school, people who saw me for who I was, not for who my family wanted me to be. I was finally happy. I was finally free. I knew that my family would never forgive me. They would always see me as the one who had destroyed them, the one who had betrayed them. But I didn't care. They had betrayed me first, and I had simply given them the truth. I had given them the consequences of their own actions. I had done what I had to do, and I had no regrets. I had learned a valuable lesson: that family is not just about blood. It's about love, respect, and loyalty. And if you don't have those things, then you don't have a family at all. I was living my own life, a life I had earned with my own hard work and my own courage. I had a future that was mine and mine alone. I had a new sense of purpose, a new sense of power. I had a new beginning, and I knew that this time it would be a true one. I had been a victim for so long, a quiet bystander in my own life, and now I was in control. I had found my voice, and I had used it to speak the truth. I had done what my grandmother had wanted me to do. I had stood up for myself. I had not only gotten my inheritance back, but I had also freed myself from the emotional and financial prison my family had put me in. I was finally free. I had a new life, and I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. Have you ever felt a similar sense of betrayal and liberation in your life? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched something in you, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes. The greatest act of love is a final act of letting go. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the truth is the only currency that matters.